Welcome back, everybody. I'm Brenda. I'm the host of the X podcast. And today we have on Naomi Lane. Hi, Naomi. How are you doing today?
Hi, Brenda. I'm great. How are you?
Good. I'm so good. So I just dove right into it, but I just want to welcome everybody. Naomi is an artist and an architectural conservationist. I brought you on today because I think that number one, you're also an entrepreneur. You sell your art to people and you talk about heritage conservation, and your artwork revolves around that genre, that medium. And I just think it's fascinating that we sometimes think of artists as being artists and unique unto themselves, but you're also an artist and an entrepreneur. And so I wanted to bring you on because I think that there's obviously other entrepreneurs that are listening to this podcast. I want to go behind the scenes into your business and understand it a little bit more. And and understand the world of, architect conservation and heritage conservation. So first of all, maybe tell us where you're from and how you kind of got into this work, just like from a backdrop standpoint.
So, I was originally born in England, grew up in Toronto, and then went back to England for 10 years at the age of 17. And that's where I did a lot of my studies. I studied in architecture and also in fine art. And then subsequently, I worked in theater and film set design for a number of years. And continued to do so when I came back to Canada, moved back to Toronto, continued to work in film and set design for a few years before I decided that I was really, really passionate about heritage conservation. And so I moved to Montreal to do a master's in architectural conservation. And I came here for a couple of years, and I've been here ever since. And now it's been 20 years. And so since I graduated, I started working in an architect's firm and then moved on to working for a number of cities in and around Montreal in the planning department as an architecture and heritage advisor. So I do a lot of the reviews of heritage projects, special demolition, new construction projects, renovation projects, everything to do with increasing and improving the quality of architecture and also heritage preservation.
And so, what exactly is architectural conservationist? When you talk about it from your work standpoint, but why do we need to know about this sort of profession? Like, why is it important to just like our regular society, like being aware of like heritage conservation?
Right. So, I mean, there's a couple of aspects of architectural conservation. On the one hand, you can be an architectural conservationist doing technical building work. So, you're like a building doctor in a sense. You assess and analyze the structure and conditions of an older building, and then you recommend how to conserve it. But then what I'm doing at the moment is a little bit more, maybe a little less technical and more along the lines of analysis of projects. The importance of all of that really is because architectural heritage is part of our cultural heritage. They're buildings that have been around for decades, if not hundreds of years. In a sense, they're sort of like a living history museum, the evolution of architecture in our society and also craftsmanship. And so once we lose them, we don't get them back. So my role is to really try and bring attention to the importance of conserving those buildings because, oftentimes there was a huge amount of time, effort, and energy that was put into heritage buildings. A lot of quality, noble building materials, a lot of craftsmen doing really detailed work, all sorts of architectural components. They were often built at a time when we had a lot more time built. Mm-hmm. Whereas today there is quite a bit of contemporary construction that is built really quickly, profit driven, and people don't necessarily take the time or put the investment into doing it right and doing it with a lot of quality detailing.
Yeah, I love that backdrop into it. And I get fascinated by, I have a degree in political science from university, but I minored wherever I could in art history just because I'm fascinated by architecture, art, and how history played into certain things. And I think you're bang on about architecture and just how buildings were created. We had a lot more time. We had a lot more craftsmanship and tradespeople let's face it, we both reside in Canada. There's a lack of trades all the time. If you need to get your, faucet fixed or outlet fixed for your fridge, it's hard to find a tradesperson to come. And so even the quality of workmanship isn't that great because people are tight on jobs and job times. But Yeah,
And I
I
would
was
also
actually,
actually add to that that one of the reasons why there's a lack of craftspeople is because there've been a lack of training for a very long time. They weren't necessarily professions that were valorized. And in modern or contemporary design, craftsmanship, I mean, there are craftsmanship in terms of building detailing, but in terms of sculptural craftsmanship or other
right.
types of craftsmanship, there was no call for it in contemporary design. So the trade sort of dwindled. And it's only been recently that we've started to wake up to the importance of also training a new generation of craftsmen. But alongside the training, you also need architects that are going to specify those sorts of detailing in their buildings for the craftsmen to have work.
I can imagine that because it was probably a trade that was passed down through generations, like families. You'd have a father passing it down to their son, or a mother passing it down to their daughter, type of, skilled trades, and not something that, again, that you would learn in a school, but just through, your family generational upbringing. So when you talk about your art and, moving out of your job and into your business that you have as an entrepreneur, and you're an artist and you work on commission pieces for your clients, what does that look like? How do you work on a commission piece? How does that preservation play into the relationship that you have with your client?
So I would start by talking with them about the particular building that they want to, that they cherish and that they
Mhm.
want to use in one of my paintings. So, for example, I had a client who had a family home in India that she uh, was really close to her heart. I believe her father built it, or at least a family member had constructed it, and it was a family home. It was really special for her, and she wanted to incorporate that building into a painting so that she could hang it on her wall and have it visible. In her day to day. So we started off by looking at the building. She sent me a number of photos. And for this piece, she wanted to integrate the photo into one of my poured paint landscapes. So I obviously had to make sure that the quality of the photo was high enough quality to work in the painting, not have too much shading and that kind of thing. And then I integrated the photo into the work, added some layers, and we worked together to produce something that was really special for her. That's just one approach. I do use photos that I take myself normally in my paintings, unless it's a commissioned piece. But I also do paintings where there are no photos. The photos may be a point of reference, and the whole painting is just pure paint. So it really just depends. But I think the objective behind what I'm trying to do is to sort of make architectural conservation sexy.
Right.
I think a number of people think when they hear architectural conservation, it's heavy, it's fuddy-duddy,
Mhm.
it's a little boring, it's in the past. So I'm really trying to bring new light to inspire people to care more about it. This generation, maybe the next generation as well, ideally. And to do so, I try and bring vibrant colors into my work. I also bring sort of like abstract paint pouring techniques. I might bring also some stenciling or layering it up a bit in order to, yes, take a traditional subject, but really make it resonate with some vibrant color and maybe some abstract backgrounds.
I love the fact that some of your clients come from all over the place, so it's not like you have to go visit the place, you have to go see the building, walk through it. You can do it from photographs, and obviously talking to the clients and getting their sort of vibe, their intention behind what they want in that piece of artwork. What are some ways that you get involved, I guess, in, outside of your work, but through your artistry, through the work what you do with your clients around heritage conservation, or even ways that we could understand it more, right? To get involved in our own communities.
Well, the way that I get involved is, well, for starters, I join a number of heritage organizations because I want to find out what they're working on, what they're
Mhm.
doing to preserve the buildings. So, for example, in Montreal, we have Heritage Montreal. We also have, on a more federal scale, we have the National Trust for Canada. that's connected with Parks Canada. So there's lots of different levels of heritage organizations that are working in all communities across Canada, but all over the world. And there's always an opportunity to connect with one or many of them, depending on what your preferences are. There's also Association for the Conservation of Old Houses. If you have an old heritage home that you want to connect with other people who also own heritage homes and are looking for maybe for some information about practical tips for conservation, that would be a good organization to join. So I like to get involved in these organizations and find out what they're working on and find out what the hot topics are too. I know that Heritage Montreal has a part of their site devoted to buildings at risk, and the residents can flag a building that they're worried about and put it on that list. And then the organization and the volunteers can work towards trying to bring attention to that and ideally preserve it.
Some ways that I've been always just sort of fascinated with it when I go to different cities. I love going on walking tours. A lot of the, people that take you around from a historical standpoint will tell you about the neighborhoods, tell you about, prominent people in either politics or in that community's origin. You learn a lot more about sort of like the city that you're in by looking at where people lived and how they lived and, where they, grew their communities together. I always find that fascinating. And where you live in Montreal, there's so much like rich history for Canada there. Sherbrooke, Avenue or whatever street is just like, I love walking down Sherbrooke because there's just so many great old homes and you can find out about, this person owned this, and again, sometimes it's good history, sometimes it's not so good history. A lot of the times these older homes or buildings were maybe brought about through colonization, taking away something from somebody else to give to other people. But it's all part of history, right? And it just gets you more informed about like where you live and how that city came to its being. Most recently too, so I was just going to say one other thing. Most recently, I stayed in Vancouver because I live on Vancouver Island. And I decided to stay in this old hotel. It was built in like the late 1800s during Vancouver's small, short, not very profitable gold rush. But it was a hotel that was built for prospectors. And so I stayed in the hotel. It's been around since then. It's always been a hotel, sometimes a hotel of ill repute. And then now it's like, a little bit more legitimized. But it was fascinating staying in it. It's been renovated and it's like this now bougie place to stay in Vancouver. But I've always driven by it, never stayed in it. And then this weekend I decided to stay there.
Well, what's interesting about that too is that it's indicative of a particular use at a particular time in the evolution of the city. And by you staying in there, you get a sense of that. You get a sense of the history and of Vancouver's place in the gold rush, for example. Yeah. So that's really interesting. And I was also going to say that architectural heritage doesn't always have to be monumental. So there's vernacular heritage as well. So, I know in Montreal, but I know that this is in other cities as well, that they've got the veterans homes where they were small homes that were built after the war for veterans coming back from the war to raise their families. They were small homes on big lots because at the time veterans needed to be a bit more self-sufficient, to grow their own fruit and vegetables, et cetera, et cetera. So, that was never intended to be grandiose heritage, but now that is part of the architectural evolution of the society, and it is considered a type of heritage, of architectural heritage. So, I think also in some of my paintings, I try and draw attention to vernacular heritage as well, whether it be barns, whether it be veterans' homes or shoebox houses, in order to remind people that there's sort of like a charm and a beauty and a sort of humane scale of proportion in these homes and in these buildings that is sometimes just as interesting as a temple or a large monument.
I love that. Where can people find your work and dig into it and understand it more and potentially work with you?
Yeah, so I have a website. It's called NaomiLaneArt.com. So on that website, you will see different formats of my paintings, small, medium, and large. And I also have some merchandise, if you're just really into architecture and you want a mug with some architecture on it. I also have some of my paintings that have been put on some of that merchandise as well. And then if you just want to find out a little bit about conservation in general, you can always message me through my website. happy to answer any questions. In fact, I'm working at the moment as well on a little course for children, and it's to teach children how to draw buildings and specifically heritage buildings.
Oh, cool.
And this is a course that I'd like to sort of promote eventually once it's finished so that it inspires the next generation.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Naomi, what's one thing that you're looking forward to? I mean, this podcast is going to come out in the fall of 2024, so someone could be listening to it in in 2025 or 2026. But what's something that's like really important to you right now with your art and with your clients and heritage conservation that you're just like looking forward to doing, a goal or an intention that you've got set around the work that you provide this fall?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think my big piece is to connect with other like-minded people or people that are curious to find out more about heritage conservation. Now, whether it's just an exchange with me or exchange on social media or my website, I'm really, really interested in just feeling like I can engage in a conversation with more and more people about this subject. Now, if someone's interested in my work, great. Whether it's buying a piece that's already created or creating a commission, I'm so thrilled to be able to work on that. But above and beyond that, it's also just to generate a discussion around heritage conservation and for it to be a little bit more demystified and for also us to be able to answer some of people's concerns around it.
Amazing. Naomi,
Yeah.
thanks so much for being on today. It's been great hearing from you about your business and what we can do locally, but also engage with artists like yourself around heritage conservation. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.